Welcome to Garlic Marketing Show. I'm Garlic. I've got Christene Marie here from the Knowing Agency, and we're going to talk about branding and all sorts of fun stuff here at Garlic Studios. Do you like Christene Marie, or do you do
Christene? Marie's legally my last name now.
Legally your last name?
Yes, it's on my passport, so it's as legal, and social security card.
Okay.
So it's as legal as
I wasn't sure if it was like one of those hyphenated. I know people named like Nancy Margaret and.
I know. People sometimes they'll be like, "That's my middle name," and I'm like, "I know that was mine too at one point." I don't give them the whole background, but yes, it used to be my middle name.
And it's part of your brand now.
Yeah.
So tell us about Knowing Agency.
Yeah, so I started at 5 years. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary last month. It started off as a full-blown marketing agency. And it was interesting. I never had the intent to start something big, start something that was so, I guess, all-encompassing as it turned out to be kind of midway through. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and was like, why am I giving all my money to other people? And it kind of just sparked in me like, okay, my biggest fear was that I would not be able to continue learning because I was in a job where I was learning a lot. However, the way that they were going about the branding and marketing piece and the execution for our clients, I felt like it was such a one-size-fits-all, and there wasn't a lot of nuance and dynamism in the way that we actually cared for our clients because we were so big. Yeah. And so starting my own agency, I had a client come to me, and it was digital marketing across Google Ads for a company in Dominican Republic, and they were selling cold pressed juices in Walmarts and Giant Eagles. And so I went and I hired a Google Ads expert, and I hired a website designer and a graphic designer, and I project managed the whole thing, and we kind of grew from there. And so as people came on, we just expanded our services because in my role previous, I did the management of an integrated marketing approach while learning the branding side of things. And so I actually never went to school. I just learned by doing and listened to podcasts. And so because that was the foundation upon which I learned all that I knew was self-taught and through the pursuit of execution and testing.
Best way to learn this stuff.
Exactly. And back then, I mean, digital marketing wasn't in schools. No. And today I even wonder how much of it is actually current.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you can't.
It's changing all the time.
It's changing too fast.
It's changing too fast.
And how can you be teaching it if you're not doing it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It's interesting when I'm on stages, a lot of the other speakers haven't actually pushed the buttons and done the strategic, like their slides are built for them by their team who are doing the doing.
And I don't understand because it's like there's so much of this stuff that people say and it sounds right.
Yes, it sounds good.
And like one of my first podcasts back in the day was with Ryan Dice, and we talked about logical lies. It sounds like it's going to be right.
Yes.
But it's not. When you look at that, so being on stages, tell me a few of the things that you've heard people say that you're like, that's not true. You don't have to name the person. But there's like things like, I'm like, people are like, oh, you need to do this. I'm like, no. It's like, I know with like YouTube, there's so many people that are like, you need to grow a big channel and you need to get a ton of subscribers and you need to do all this. I'm like, no, you don't.
Right.
That's not how you make money.
The biggest thing that I get concerned about is when I hear people focus so much on the vanity metrics.
Yeah.
And they're not really paying attention to the bottom line. Even one of my clients, I mean, they were just acquired and they're part of a $350 million company, which is great. However, because they've got people breathing down their necks now, they're now looking at, okay, well, what's the number of our leads? And I'm like, yes, and let's also look at the bottom line.
Yeah.
Are we actually meeting our sales goals? Because the leads that are coming in are actually truly qualified. So it's not the vanity metric of number of leads. It's what's the conversion rate that ultimately is driving, are we meeting our sales goals and our revenue goals? And so it's really the getting hooked up and am I having the subscribers and the followers and engagements? No, are you driving sales? And you and I chatted about this before, and I loved your approach on this when you gave me a great example of a company that's putting out YouTube content for website design.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing what
it's I see this because you don't want to you can get 100,000 views to build your own website, but someone who's going to spend money with you on building a website, they don't want to know how to build the website. They want to know the questions to ask, how to guide it.
Yes.
I was talking.
I love that.
I was listening today about software development, and it's like, hey, I don't want to learn how to develop the software, but you have to know. There's certain things you have to know, and that's what I want to know is what do I need to know. And the other piece of that too is, we talk about this all the time, the bigger the client that you're chasing, the less they're going to be engaged because they don't want to like and comment. And I have this, and literally the other day, someone's like, yeah, I've been listening to your podcast and on your list for 4 or 5 years. And they finally pick up the phone.
Yeah. Right place, right time.
Yeah, it's just like,
right.
yeah, so you never know. But that's a great point.
Yeah, and it's the consistency of execution too.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at the vanity metrics, then there is an aspect of, well, I'm not getting as many views. Is this even working? However, it's, do you want the broad reach or the depth?
Yeah.
You know, what are you really going after? And so then it comes to, what are your goals and what's your vision? Without clarity of vision, you can't have clarity of the plan.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So when you say clarity of vision, like, I think that means different things to different people. Like when you work with a company, how do you help define their vision?
So I really focus on, we actually have the knowing process, which has 3 different parts to it. Know your brand, know your audience, and know your data. And so often we focus on the data piece. And, you know, a lot of times people are focusing on the audience, which is good. But we never back up to, okay, what's home base? What are our values? Where are we actually going to harken back to the bottom line goals? And so we really take time to truly understand the brand in terms of, okay, what are your values? What are those core pillars sustaining and guiding your business? If you think of the bowling pins in an alley, right? Your vision is effectively at the very end of that alley, the pins that you want to knock over. However, the values are guiding you there, and the data is your kind of your roadmap to get there. But without clarity of what that is in terms of your vision, so we take the time to really understand the inception of the business and key points. It's kind of like if you think of it as a graph. When you have the spikes throughout your business, you know, what's a historical data that's really done well for you that perhaps it's kind of in the monotony.
Yeah.
Some of the times when I'm talking to different founders and personal brands even, they don't realize their own expertise because it comes so naturally and it's so easy to them. So what we do is we just ask copious questions and draw out who they are in the heartbeat, because so often the vision is kind of embedded in there without them actually taking time to really take stock of what is driving me at a deep core level. So there's the emotion and the logic there. And so many times if you only focus on the logic, you miss the heart and soul of the why.
Oh, yeah.
And the why and the logic together, the data and the why, is really what can help you get clear on your vision.
Yeah, and can you give an example of that? Like someone you've worked with?
Yeah. So, well, actually, I can give you a personal example. So I started the business. My intention wasn't to go big. And that's so often what we find happens when we sit down with these entrepreneurs and business owners, is that they just have kind of evolved and gotten big, and it's almost like outside of their control. And so that's effectively where I found myself 2 years ago. And, having my own business, I was really grateful for the opportunity to hire people and work with different brands that were bigger than others, some global. But when my personal life went crashing down, that was what forced the reset. And it forced me to pause and really look and see, like, okay, well, what do I truly want, and where's my life going?
Yeah.
Because without the clear insight of who the individual is, they can't lead well and thus put forward a vision that has real deep roots in it. And so for me, that was really important, that I did the work to actually explore, okay, the knowing frameworks and the knowing processes, know your brand, know your audience, and know your data. The knowing framework on a personal level is taking the time to understand, well, how was I raised to be? What was the mindsets and behaviors and kind of worldview that was handed to me by my parents or by my environment? And then understanding how that shows up today. And then the only way that we can break free from that is to then set new targets. Because otherwise, if we don't set those new targets and say, okay, well, who do I want to be? We end up doing a 360 and just returning back there.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I got married at 20. I mentioned to you earlier, I grew up in a very Christian conservative home, and we both agreed that we didn't want to mirror behaviors similar to what our parents mirrored, but we never set new targets. So we effectively, 8.5 years later, when my husband left, I realized that we were the very picture of our parents because we never set those new targets. We know what we didn't want, but we didn't know where we were headed. And so that forced pause to really examine self and identify what is the logic. Okay, what are those things that I'm actually truly gifted at on the kind of the tangible, logical level, and then also what emotionally propels me forward. What's my antagonist in life? And really clearly identifying that, because otherwise you're going to be turning external to everyone around you and saying, oh, you're the enemy, you're the enemy, you're the enemy. I read Patrick Bet-David's Choose Your Enemies Wisely at the beginning of the year, and it was really good to get crystal clear on who is my antagonist, what is my antagonist. And I found that by doing so, emotional unhealth was my antagonist, because I see that it's wrecking people's lives, marriages, homes, businesses even. You know, you see these people who start their businesses in partnership in lockstep. They want the same thing, they're committed, they're dedicated, they're willing to do everything, and then it blows up. And so for me, that's my personal antagonist. And then being able to bring that into the business, now we've been able to really hyper focus, because I now know what it is that I really care about. We're able to bring that emotional health piece into the way we look at businesses, because you have to be emotionally healthy to look at the data and be changed by it. Otherwise, pride and ego are going to get in the way.
Yeah.
So it's really, and even the emotional intelligence aspect when it comes to looking at your audience. Otherwise, empathy turns into manipulation. So emotional intelligence touches every single part of the knowing process. Know your brand, know your audience, and know your data, because you have to have the humility to withhold the ego and thus be changed by the data. You need to be able to have the empathy, which is part of the definition of emotional intelligence. You have to have the empathy to connect with the audience and thus draw them to you. And then you also have to know your brand so that you're moving forward with authenticity as to who you are, and thus stand out from your competitors. So long as your customers, competitors, or even I'm trying to think of what that, I worked with Ryan Dice, and we did a little series on copywriting. And there were 3 C's: the competitors, the competition, and I'm trying to remember the other one, but around trends and data and just kind of what's going on in the technological atmosphere. You know, being changed by everyone external around you, rather than, no, this is who we truly are, clarity of vision, and thus being moved in that regard.
And so, you know, coming back to that branding piece, like most time when someone says we need to do some branding, I'm like, ugh, because they're thinking logos and colors.
Yes.
Define, when you say know your branding, what are the elements that you need to know?
Yeah. So the way that, actually I learned this at an agency I was at before I started my business, the way that they defined brand, which I absolutely love, is essentially setting the expectation for the experience that's going to take place and then exceeding expectations. So it's really tapping into the emotional expectation about what is the anticipated experience going to be, and then over-delivering. And if you look at other brands, I mean, Apple has created an environment where people will camp out overnight waiting for the next iPhone release because it's an experience. And they're so emotionally loyal to the brand. Mm-hmm. And then you also look at, I mean, Southwest does a wonderful job at this too. The emotional experience that one has at every single touch point of the customer journey. So it's understanding what kind of emotions do you want to conjure in the audience when they think about your brand? And then how are you setting up the roadmap at every single touch point of that experience throughout any product offering or service, from customer service when you call them to the actual pilot on the plane. I mean, I was on a Southwest flight the other day, and the lady had us all turn off, they turned off the overhead lights, and then she had us all turn on our little blue call your flight attendant buttons, and then we sang happy birthday to this person, and they made a little wish and blew out the candles, and then they turned off all the lights because the candles were being blown out, and it was fun. And that so clearly aligns to the Southwest brand. Yeah. And so the more clear you are in terms of, this is our value, this is the experience that we want our customers to have, then you get everyone bought into it, and thus they can execute in their own unique way.
So how are you determining, I mean, because it's like, oh, I just want to be like Southwest. When you go to a company, how are you determining those emotions that they want to get across in that feeling?
Well, I focus on them and who they are. So, for example, one of our clients, they have a home services business, and they deliver basement waterproofing and foundation repair services.
Exciting.
And yeah, very exciting. And so it's been interesting playing around with the messaging. And it was interesting too, because they have a very high price point because of the products they use. They're the best in the industry. However, when you call them, it's a Midwest company. It's very kind of homegrown experience that you have when you call them. And so I was speaking with the board and leadership, and we were talking about some of the campaigns that we're running, and one of them says, you know, we deliver Cadillac priced services. And I said, I totally understand what you're saying. You know, you do. you deliver at the Cadillac price, but your experience isn't Cadillac, so therefore we cannot present ourselves as Cadillac. That doesn't mean it's a bad customer experience.
Yeah.
It means that it's not wearing a suit and tie. It's these sweet women at the call center answering who go home to, their family and cook dinner. And then we have to be consistent then at every single touch point, even though he kind of wanted the brand to elevate to match the price. So there's a very fine line when it comes to understanding what kind of the emotional expectation is. And so when we first started working with them, we did a deep dive into their audience. We did a deep dive into taking actual phone calls with their top customers. We executed a survey and they got a 10% response rate on email, which is pretty high considering. And we got great feedback. We heard that people, when they call this company, they are calling and they think that they know what the answer is. That completely changes the way the salesmen now need to approach the customer because they think that they know.
Yeah.
And so now that changes the messaging entirely, right? And then also when they're coming, we ask them, how are you feeling when you call us? Are you feeling confident? Are you feeling worried? Are you feeling afraid? Because this is their largest asset, which is their home. So literally, what's the emotional feeling when you call?
Yeah.
And so we literally polled 6,000 of their customers. And so that was really helpful. And then we also ran A/B testing across programmatic ads. And we tested different types of messaging. And one of the messages that really resonated was from our family to yours. We're this family. And it's a family-grown business. I mean, it was started by family. So that was really helpful. So running the polls and doing the actual testing with the clients themselves, and then also executing ads to test which messaging resonates as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because it's like, I'm glad you listen to the customers and really listen to them. And so many people just go into like, oh, we're going to brand, we want to be the Cadillac of this, and then let's go into this meeting and just do the meeting and we're going to come out with the whole new brand.
Yes.
And it's like, improving sales through listening to the customers and the sales experience is so crucial.
One thing that's interesting too, the sales team actually at this company just started using, I believe it's called Gorilla, which is, it's literally, I actually don't remember the way that they've employed it. It's essentially listening the entire time the customer and the salesman are talking. So the salesman goes into their home and it's being recorded the entire time. The recording is on the phone calls that are taking place. And then what it does is it uses AI to actually identify kind of peaks in the conversation when they use certain keywords, when the customer says certain things, and then it pulls all the trends together from the 50 plus salesmen and then helps the salesman be able to curate and craft their message even more tailored. So guerrilla marketing is what it was.
Amazing.
Called,
that's invaluable.
I know.
It's
so helpful.
And also informs marketing then,
yes,
right?
Right.
Yeah. Instead of everyone just guessing.
Yeah.
In which, it's like, oh, I know what's best. I'm like, no, you don't. The customer knows.
The customer knows.
So, you move on, and now you talked about branding and then audience. What does that mean? I mean, obviously I know what audience means, but how are you all approaching that?
Yeah, so we take time. So we usually do a discovery process, taking this knowing process and doing a deep dive into not only the brand, the audience, and the data, but with these polls that we send out and with the actual phone call conversations with them, we build out customer avatars. And ChatGPT is actually really, really helpful with this to train ChatGPT right at the outset when we're going in to this knowing process. This is how the brand talks. This is their type of audience, because then what we do is we put some of those findings from the surveys, from the polls, from the current website, and we put it into ChatGPT, and then it spits out these incredibly curated avatars. We used to do this on our own and by hand, but then ChatGPT is able to give an additional layer, and then you just offer prompt after prompt after prompt. And I can send you some after if you want to put it in the show notes about what we've used in the past, but it's been really helpful getting almost like a second set of eyes.
Yeah.
And in terms of the analysis, because going in and really understanding what those surveys are sharing with us, and then also from the programmatic ads. So we actually worked that into our knowing process as well in that 90-day stint of doing a deep dive of, let's actually launch ads during this time. That's just smart. Purely for testing.
Yeah.
And so that's been helpful in delivering back to us some pretty good results. One thing too, we were talking about this before we started about the vanity metrics. paying attention to, this is where the data piece comes in, but paying attention to the videos specifically on YouTube that are garnering the conversions versus the impressions.
Yeah.
That's been really helpful too, because when we're thinking about the top of the funnel and we're thinking, okay, this is really what is capturing people's attention, and then this is what drives them down towards the bottom of the funnel where they are having the conversions. It's really important when people are thinking about our audience, what is the messaging ultimately driving these different segment audiences, because it's for one client in particular, they're in multiple states. The states differ between suburban, rural, kind of living in the country. All of those people are going to buy very, very differently. And so then being able to say, okay, here's the data that we have in terms of the ads that are running, the emails that are being executed, and then how do they line up in these different audience verticals? So typically we have 3 to 5 different audience verticals, and then being able to kind of identify these data points match up with these different verticals in these different areas of the customer funnel.
Wow.
And then we do use the Enneagram. It's a personality test, and we run our findings through the eyes of the Enneagram to be able to identify what is the core motivator when people are reaching out to us. So the surveys play a part, the programmatic ads play a part, the findings from the data on the YouTube side, it all kind of amalgamates to paint the picture of the audience.
Wow. Yeah, and that's amazing. And so you've painted the picture of the audience, and you've done some testing, obviously. So what's the next step to really deploy this?
Yeah. So the way that I kind of think about it is, okay, here's the brand on one end of the bridge, here's the audience on the other end. The authenticity in which how we position the brand is going to move them closer to the audience, and then the empathy which we are speaking to the audience is going to move them closer to you. And then the handshake, where that takes place, is on the marketing vehicle. And so through the deep dive of the audience, we do spend time on, we call it their watering holes. Where are they actually spending their time? Yep. And so then that informs where we show up on the marketing side. And so from the deep dive into the brand and the audience and their data, we then create a marketing strategy which they can deploy on their own or we deploy for them. And it's a full year of the marketing strategy. And it changes so much per industry, per company.
Yeah.
There's not a really one size fits all. Again, I hate that.
Yeah.
Even though I know that it's a good rinse and repeat, it's frankly more scalable, right? And so when it comes to really understanding what is the strategy for your business, keeping in mind where do you actually want to go, because your competitors may not want to be going where you're going.
Yeah.
And so if you're building the strategy based on what they're doing, you may really not be serving you best in the long haul.
I think that's an important thing to people to realize, is like the vision, because when we started what became Video Case Story, it was, people were like, well, I'm competing against these big guys and competing against this. I'm like, but you're not really competing for the same person,
right?
Or you don't want the same thing,
right?
Back in the day, you all had to kind of compete because it was like everyone was looking for an attorney. You just had to compete for being an attorney. But now you can be very specific about the people you serve and what you want.
I love that. And when it comes to the business vision too, are you trying to exit? Are you trying to be bought and stay with the company and help grow with it? What's your goal, really? My family has a 102-year-old painting business. My dad and my brother and I recently became partners over the last year. My dad has never wanted that to get very big because he wanted it more as a lifestyle business.
Yeah.
That's very different than looking at these other big painting businesses that are now, starting in other states. And it's easy if you don't have your ego in check. We were talking about Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy. If you don't have your ego in check, it's easy to feel far behind when actually you're truly living the life that you want.
That's such an important piece for these businesses. It's like, because there's people that want to scale, and that will change too. Your vision will change.
True.
But because it's like, I see everyone just talk about scale, and like it's like it's a bad thing if you don't want to grow your business.
Right.
And it's like, hey, if you're happy.
Exactly.
It's like you're happy, it's all right, and you can change what makes you happy, and how do you identify? Because my buddy Greg Hickman, we were talking about this, and he goes, it's one thing to define what you want. It's another thing to admit what you want, right? And because you can define it, and then you can admit what you really want. Because I hear it in people, and you get it out. How do you know? Because there's got to be people like you said, like, I wanted to be the Cadillac. And you're like, do you really?
Yes. Well, because then you got to fire all of your staff and hire people that fit the Cadillac brand if that's what you want.
Exactly. So what are some of the signals that you know that someone's like defining their vision the wrong way?
That's such a good question. I think it's one of the best signals is that they haven't done their own personal work to know who they are. Because it's only by way of knowing who you truly are that then you can show up and guide your team in defining the vision based on what's best for the business. And ultimately, I mean, where do your passions lie? If you're the owner, right? Yeah. Obviously, it's a little bit different if you're just an executive and you don't really have stake in the business. It's harder to drive perhaps on that personal level.
Yeah, but I mean, you should be lining up with a company that's in alignment with what you want, lifestyle you want, business you want, right?
Right, and Ian, it's so interesting, especially now more than ever. There is so much competition vying for our employees. And so the clearer your mission is, the more people are going to be bought in, and then talk about longevity and retention.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the best retention plans is to have a really strong vision and mission that people can emotionally connect with. Yeah. Tom's shoes just skyrocketed when there was buy one, we're giving one.
Yeah.
People love feeling like they're a part of something bigger, especially.
Well, certain people do.
True.
Yeah.
I think with this next generation, we're seeing a lot more people who want to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, especially because in terms of isolation and what COVID did for these young people, I think they're so hungry for connection. It's such a different landscape in which we're competing and selling in than when our parents were talk about the true consumer, which was sitting kicked back on your lazy boy chair, watching the TV and picking up the phone and buying whatever was being advertised. So it's a completely different generation that we're speaking to, and I think a lot of them, to your point, not everybody, but a decent amount of them are more leaning towards mission-driven, impact-oriented companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important piece. And it's still kind of a secondary piece because you still have to fulfill.
Absolutely,
promise, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm kind of anti start with why, because they're like, well, people buy the why. I'm like, if the iPad was a piece of crap,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, people are willing to pay more for a good customer experience.
Oh yeah.
So to your point, yes, the product, and it's also the entire experience that they're having with it. So the customer. Actually, I was at Patrick Bet-David's event yesterday, and they had the number one restaurant in the world. The owner came and spoke, and he was talking about just the spirit of hospitality. And the way that he's brought. No, don't ask me that. I don't remember his name. I'll let you know after.
Yeah.
But he was really. I had heard him before at Joe Polish's Genius Network event last year, and it was a great talk. It was the same keynote, but just he added new examples. And
not Danny Meyer.
Was it him?
Was it Danny Meyer?
I don't know. I was in the restroom when they announced him, and I came back in, and it was great. But he, his restaurant's in New York. He walks across the street to Tiffany & Co. and says, "Hey, we want to." Okay, yeah, Danny, thank you. But he effectively said, most people when they get engaged, champagne is poured. That's the standard experience. We want to go above and beyond. And so he got these champagne glasses from Tiffany & Co. in a nice blue box. And then he got 1,000 of them. And he has them back in his restaurant. Somebody gets engaged.
Yeah.
They pour the champagne in these beautiful flutes. They bring them out to them. And their glasses, slightly more elevated than everyone else's glasses. But at the end of the meal, they take the champagne flutes back, they wash them, wrap them up in the blue box, and say, "Hey, may you always remember the day you got engaged." And wow, people were blown away. And so really it's taking this culture of how can you take that customer experience, which technically it's at the bottom of the funnel. Once the customer has, that's the end of the meal. They're done. They've been the customer. They're bought and paid for.
They're going to talk about that the rest of their lives.
Exactly. Now they become evangelists.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the customer journey, and that was one of the biggest things that when we're looking and going through this knowing process, it's taking full funnel responsibility, which is every step, all the way down to they're done being a customer. What happens after that?
But to your point too, they know their brand so well that they don't advertise. right?
Yes.
There's no marketing.
Yes.
And I think that, I talk about this a lot because that champagne glass is where the money's made. Meaning they're going to come back there every time they're in New York, right?
Yes, exactly.
And, I call it the green zone because it's like it happens from the time someone's ready to work with you or whatever,
right,
past when they decide into when they're into the meal or even through the end of the meal and leaving, right? And, in the restaurant industry, like one of the most important things is like how fast you get the check when someone's ready.
Yes.
And people they're like, well, they're done with dinner, they can sit there. And it's like, no,
that's important actually.
Yeah, they're ready to go. And it's part of the experience.
They're done.
Because you can have a great experience and then like 3 hours later, you're waiting for your check and you're like, this sucked. So true. And we don't think about that experience.
Yeah.
How are you taking all that branding information now and with a company like you were talking about, are you involved in that experience? Like when you work with the company?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things. So looking at the entire customer process, when we did our initial audit, so part of our knowing the brand is we talk with their top department heads, and we go through every part of the customer funnel and we say, what are the opportunities for each one of these parts, whether you own it or not, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about different departments, right? They're just waiting for someone to ask them so that they can share. And we get such good feedback, Ian. Like, I think that this is really something that most companies should be doing on an annual basis, of literally do an audit of your company. What do people have to say about different departments? It can be anonymous. They just fill out a survey.
Yeah.
And then you go and then you get all the department heads together and then you talk about how can we optimize every single touch point. So in response to your question, what we found was that the response time was way too long between the lead calls. They get set an appointment, nothing happens until the salesman shows up, and then nothing happens after that for up to 10 to 15 days while they curate the proposal for them.
Yeah, and that's like people are like in limbo, they're like, when's this gonna happen?
Yes, exactly.
So
it was the lack of communication.
And like having, we tell them have process videos and be sending those out, and like this is what's gonna happen next, and here's how to get excited. And
right. Well, and one of the things that I found that, when I look back, this is why looking back at your own data, where have there been those trending spikes in your business? I got one of my biggest clients who curated over $150,000 in just 9 months in terms of revenue. I sent a $25 Christmas gift to them. And that was all it was. It was just a gift. She calls me and says, hey, we want to work with, and then lists out all these big brands. And we started out, our very first project with her was writing out a proposal for an Amazon deal that she won. And we did all the copywriting, all the design for the proposal, and then we were able to get her the deal. And then it, turned into a whole bunch more. But it was interesting because it was that gift that put us in emotional favor with her. Again, people don't like that concept of emotion, but Harvard did a study. 95% of our purchase-making decisions are in our subconscious, which is where emotions live.
Yeah.
We have to be tapping into the emotions of our customers.
Yeah, I mean, anyone listens to this podcast, I talk about Paul Zak and all his studies, and it's all based on chemical-based emotions.
Yes.
I don't know if you know, it's a great book, The Moral Molecule, where he talks about, the science of it, and they did studies, and it's like when people's empathy, cortisol and oxytocin levels are raised, they positively decide on something afterwards, no matter what it is.
No matter what.
30% more.
Wow. I love that stat. I've never heard that.
Yeah,
That's so good.
it's and he's done it over and over with nonprofits. Like you can show them anything unrelated.
Yes.
But our emotions are everything. We want to be logical animals.
We think we are.
But if we were logical animals, we'd all be driving Toyotas.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
I mean, they last the longest. They're the most durable cars. They get best gas mileage.
Yeah.
I mean,
so true.
But we don't. And people try and back it all up. But it's so important to know those emotions and also to bring them out.
Yes. Yeah, knowing what to say to draw them out. I love that you just said that, because so many times if we're just sticking on the selling pieces and the logical data, hey, here's the data for why I'm the best. It's what everyone else is doing, and they forget. There's nothing memorable about that.
I mean, people always ask me what's the difference between a case story and a case study. I'm like, what's the last case study you remember?
I love that.
Right? You don't remember it.
Yeah.
We don't remember numbers.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. He did a great job for this company. What did he do? I don't know. I mean,
Right.
if we all remember case studies, we'd all gotten A's in history.
It's so true.
So how do you all, now you have all this data, what are you doing to make sure that those emotions are in your marketing?
So we have our brand guides, and that's been really, really helpful. It's essentially, literally, here's our guidebook for all of our messaging, because it is easy to focus on the data. And the data is what proves the emotion is working, right?
Yeah.
And so it is easy to get so fixated on the numbers, and especially when you've got your customers breathing down your throat, if you're an agency. But even still, the board could be asking you, hey, how do you know what you're doing is working? Show us the proof, and the proof is in the numbers, oftentimes. And so being able to have the guide and then referencing it. So I started this process towards the beginning of the year, where we did a SWOT analysis to start us off at the beginning of the year, and then a mid-marketing meeting during the middle of the year, because this is something that I personally do that I'm bringing into my team, both on my personal team with the Knowing Agency, and then also for our clients, because we manage their marketing teams as well. My birthday's in July, and then New Year's, so it's 6 months in between, roughly, where it's kind of a forced pause, a forced break for me to say, okay, am I living in accordance with the way that I want to live? I mapped out, actually last year I wrote my eulogy, and I wrote down who do I want to be in terms of what others say about me. And then I did a self-audit. Am I living in accordance with this person? And so effectively, our brand guide is our eulogy in one sense. This is who we are. This is our vision. Are we, and then we hold up the mirror. Are we marketing in accordance to this brand guide? Are we delivering the customer experience in accordance to our brand guide? So our brand guide is our Bible, and then also the hard numbers too. So what we're doing is we're memorializing the numbers at the conclusion of every single month, and we do a deep dive into the numbers and then present it to the board of directors in terms of, hey, here's the hard numbers from the previous month, here's how it's measuring year over year. And so we've got a whole list of KPIs that helps us measure against that. But then in addition to those hard numbers, we are looking at on the creative side. So it's like a creative memorialization of the previous month, and then a numerical memorialization of the previous month. So both of those are helpful to guiding us, and then also kind of that mid-year pause, beginning of the year and mid-year pause, to ensure that all of the campaigns passed, planning out the rest of the campaigns. So that's effectively what we're doing, is we're looking at the last 6 months. One thing too, Ian, is that it's so easy to just keep going. It's so easy to put your head down and just keep burning the tires and not even honor the wins and honor the hard work. And people get burned out and discouraged, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's a good opportunity to kind of revitalize and rejuice everybody, and it starts now. I met with Dr. Jeff Spencer. He was the trainer for Lance Armstrong, and he helped me move through what he calls a GPS, a goal-setting positioning process. And so effectively, it's like, okay, where are we starting now? What's our neutral? What's our go zone? So that if we don't know where we're starting, we can't ever really effectively go. So it's that forced pause.
Or where you want to go, too. It's like,
exactly, yes.
I mean, that's the first part of, like, when we work with someone, we do GPS, too. It's goals, positioning, and stories. Where do
I love that.
Where do you want to go? What's the story you want to have?
Yeah.
What's the story of the people you want to work with? Where are you right now? Because if you don't know where you are, then you start working, and you're like, oh, we haven't got anywhere. I'm like, yeah, you did. You just forget.
It's like The Gap and the Gain. Have you read that?
Oh, yeah.
It's such a good book. I only read it
book,
this year for the first time, and it was exactly what I needed, because it is so easy to measure yourself against your vision, which is so important.
Or other people.
Or other people, right.
Yeah.
Rather than where did we start. So doing so at the beginning of the year, looking back over the last 6 months, you can see measurable gains.
Love that, yeah.
And then you can also propel it forward to your customers, and it's just extra juice in the tank for why they should keep hiring you and keep you on board.
So, and you're doing this for yourself as well?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
So I started getting really clear on who I was about 3 years ago, actually, when my husband left. That was the first time I really held up a mirror and looked at myself, and I saw that I'd been living as a non-person. I had been so horizontally aligned, looking at everyone and everything around me for the majority of my life, telling me who I should be. And this is the role, these are the narratives, this is what you should believe, how you should act, etc. And I just lived that way, and I had never really taken personal responsibility for who Who am I against me, my own potential, who God made me to be, etc. And so doing that really does flip the script of now it's you versus you, rather than kind of at you versus everyone else. Yeah. Because so long as you're horizontally aligned and not vertically, your compass is always going to be fundamentally broken because it's oriented east and west. So 3 years ago is really where I felt like I really started to change, because I started to know who I am and who I was made to be, rather not just my nurtured mindsets, but by my nature. Yeah. This is who I am.
And now how does that define your agency? Where do you want to go? Where do you want it to be?
So around that time, personal devastation is something that will always kind of wake you up, right?
Yeah, of course.
I don't think it has to be the only thing that wakes you up, but it serves as a really good reckoning with reality. And so by way of that, I did take a step back from being full service, and honed us in and focused us in on, okay, well what do we want to be? Who do we want to be? And as I got closer and closer by shaving off who we are not, we weren't a PR firm, even though that was a service that we offered. Frankly, we were really good at it. But we're not a PR firm. So it's almost like, imagine Michelangelo's David, chipping away who you're not to get clearer and clearer on who you are. And over the years, we've been chipping away. So we kind of knocked off these services. We don't do the digital marketing anymore. We now have a vendor, Cosm Awesome Solutions 8, John Moran. It's a wonderful company. So they're one of our partners. And so with these kind of chipping away, we've started to get more crystal clear. And all we do now is fundamentally 3 things. We do this knowing process, which is the 90-day discovery. We present the marketing plan, and then we will serve as fractional chief marketing officer. We are currently, I think I mentioned this to you, we don't have capacity to take on any more clients. And so right now I'm like, okay, well, how could we be expanding that into some semblance of taking that process and teaching heads of marketing how to do that, rather than it being tied to us. Talk about scalability. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't want our services tied to our time anymore. Because that's how it has been. So then the second thing, or third thing rather, so the knowing process, chief marketing officer, and then third is really curating these brands and building out their websites, and then giving them the marketing strategy. And then if they want us to do the chief marketing officer, we'll either support them or maybe now have them go into this community. But the thing that's really expanded is that this concept of knowing, the knowing process, knowing brands, knowing audience, knowing data, that's what gets me fired up. Remember, my antagonist is emotional and health. And I am so convinced, Ian, that if we have emotional intelligence programs in schools, if we teach leaders at companies how to operate under the lens and under the umbrella of emotional intelligence has 2 different definitions, 2 parts to it rather. The first is the ability to understand, express, and convey one's own emotions and self. And then also the ability to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy, so with wisdom. And a lot of people don't know how to do that well.
Oh, yeah. So most people don't.
I think that emotional health is going to be the antidote to our desperate desire for connection that these young kids are facing. I think it's the antidote to broken marriages and families and communities. So this is really what I'm passionate about. I have a book coming out in Q1 of next year titled Knowing, and it's effectively my process of waking up, taking responsibility and agency over self, and then creating a new foundation from which to live. Not erasing the past, pulling what I want forward with me into the future, though, so that it's almost like it has talons in your back holding you back if you're not aware of what it is, so that then you can pull up the roots and then replace it with new targets.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Awesome. So we'll put it, this has been fantastic. What's the best place to follow you?
Yeah, so Christene Marie, ChrsteneMarie.com, and then I've got all my socials there.
Where do you spend your most time on social? What's your favorite right now? What's the one you use the most?
I personally use Instagram the most.
Gotcha.
I actually have gotten most business, I'm sure that you have too, from LinkedIn. And so I highly recommend, though, I personally like Instagram the best, but I really, really recommend LinkedIn. People who are not tapping onto LinkedIn, I think it's 42% of the world's millionaires are on LinkedIn, so you need to be there too.
Yeah, LinkedIn's great, awesome. And then Instagram you love. Why do you love Instagram?
I feel like talk about stories. I'm just now starting to dip my toe into YouTube, so I'm excited to talk to you guys about that and learn from you. I actually sent your channel to my team and was like, guys, we need to consume his content. So I'm excited to learn from you on the YouTube side because I have a feeling that there's a lot more there, but I just love getting to know people. I love seeing what makes people tick and seeing their why.
Nice. So we'll put a link to your Instagram, your LinkedIn. We'll put a link to the book's landing page, which you'll get up in the next 2 days, so we can put it on there. And no agency, but thank you so much for being on the Garlic Marketing Show.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Awesome. And thank you all for joining Christene and I, and let us be part of your story. It's been on Garlic and the Garlic Marketing Show.